Hi, this is Autohaus Hamilton TV and I'm James. This video also available on my OnlyFans channel. And this video will be coming up right after the title sequence. In this video, I'm talking about clutch kits. Now, a clutch kit consists of three items. You have a release bearing, you have a pressure plate, and a friction disc. That said, the Sachs brand clutch kits that are supplied for G50 transmission 911s, 964s, and 993s are supplied as a two-part clutch kit with a pressure plate and friction disc, and you need to buy the release bearing separately. The clutch kit we're looking at here is suitable for a 915 transmission 911. So that's any 911 from 1972 up to 1986. And like I said, there's three elements to it. There's a clutch release bearing, which is also referred to as a throwout bearing. There's the friction disc and a pressure plate. The release bearing is what you come into contact with when you put your foot on the clutch pedal. So as it would be assembled up, bolted up against the flywheel, the clutch kit looks something like this. And when you press your foot on the clutch pedal, the clutch lever comes up against the release bearing, presses down and reduces the load or the pressure between the pressure plate and the friction disc. And that's what allows the clutch to move. So a clutch can be thought of as kind of like a variable switch. It's a volume control for your engine. It means that when you're transmitting drive from the engine to the gearbox, to the transmission, and ultimately to the road, it's not a binary on-off switch. And it's that degree of slip, that controllable slip, that is the feature that gives a clutch its job. So that's the release bearing. When you press on the clutch pedal, your pressure can be transmitted in one of 2.5 ways. The 2.5 ways are either by a clutch cable, and there's a half involved in that because if you've got a 2.2 litre 911, so a 911 from 1970 to 71, those cars have a push cable. So they've got a slightly different operating mechanism than the earlier and the later cable-operated clutch cars, and those cars use a pull cable. In other words, you press your foot on the clutch and the cable is pulled to transmit that impulse to the clutch release bearing. For G50 cars, so 911s from 1987 onwards, clutch operation is hydraulic, and hydraulic clutch operation is what's used on all 911s from that point forward. The pressure plate, as its name implies, presses down. A stronger pressure plate with a higher clamping force will allow the clutch to transmit more torque from the engine to the gearbox. If it's not pressing down hard enough, then it'll allow the friction disc to slip against the flywheel. The other point to bear in mind with the pressure plate is that it's a fairly heavy sucker, so it's contributing to rotational mass. And rotational mass is something that you want to minimize as far as possible. That's why for a 915 you can buy a high-performance clutch kit, and that high-performance clutch kit has a lighter pressure plate that also has a stronger clamping force. The third element of the clutch kit is the friction disc. The friction disc goes against the flywheel, and as its name implies, that friction is what allows you to progressively take up drive when you're pulling away. One other point to notice about this particular friction disc is it is a sprung-centered friction disc. In other words, the central hub is not connected directly to the friction surface. These springs allow for a degree of movement between the center and the friction surface. And that's important because it allows for a little bit of give when you're taking up drive. Now, by contrast, if you're using a dual mass flywheel, that amount of give is provided between the two halves of the dual mass flywheel. And if you're using a dual mass flywheel, then that friction disc is a solid piece without the springs included in it. So there you have it, the three elements that go to make up a clutch kit. As ever, thank you very much for watching. I'll get this.